I want you to answer this question honestly. Have you ever witnessed the end of something you love? It could be anything, from a TV show to a game, from a restaurant you loved as a kid to a store that you went to after school every single day. While this is the way things have been for as long as we can remember, it's never easy to see something we love leave our lives, especially when it is no fault of our own. There are times it can be for the better though. It could be an upgrade, a shift in focus, or just simply improving upon the thing that you love. We'll always have these fond memories in the back of our mind, a little bit of nostalgia, but overall, it's improved. Other times, however, the thing you love simply begins to degrade and eventually becomes a shell of its former self where you don't even recognize it. That brings me to the topic of today's video and something that I have loved for years growing up, the Battlefield series. Once one of the most popular FPS games in the business, Battlefield started off as a small game that grew so much, but has now become a shell of its former self. From founders leaving the original team of DICE to ridiculous requests from higher-ups and even some investors, and probably one of the biggest ones of all, simply following trends instead of starting them like they've done in the past. Battlefield is no longer the series that made it special. And it's with that I want to talk about today. This is the discussion of the complete downfall of the Battlefield franchise. Hey everyone, Tallen here with Direct Gaming, and if you enjoy the content, a like and a sub would be great, along with a comment about what your favorite game series is. Doesn't have to be Battlefield, just anything. What is your favorite series? Let me know in the comments below. But again, thank you so much for all the awesome support. Your support, whether it's simply liking it, subbing, all which is free by the way, allows us to make more and more of these videos and to give you guys the content that you want to see. All right, time to take a trip down memory lane. Battlefield is a first-person shooter series that started back in the early 2000s with developer DICE. DICE actually acquired a smaller team called Refraction Games, who started work on a little game you might know called Battlefield 1942. Again, you might have heard of this, especially if you were gaming back in the early 2000s. In fact, Patrick Soderlund, sorry if I butchered the name there, who you might remember from the BF3 days all the way until Battlefield 5, and even took on some major leadership roles, was the founder of Refraction Games. So the dude's been around a while. While they made many small games back in the day, the series they became known for soon after was the Battlefield series. Battlefield, as mentioned before, is a military FPS that combines vehicles and infantry gameplay with squads of players. Each squad has between 4 to 6 players, depending on the game that you're playing, and together you need to simply capture zones on the map to deplete your opponent's tickets. This is the main game mode, Conquest, that has basically been known throughout the franchise up until this day, actually. But back in the day, this was the big one. Over the course of the first 10 years of the 2000s, so 2000 to 2009, DICE released quite a few Battlefield games. Some of them were big releases, and others were simply fine-tuning things. But a few of those games included 1942, Battlefield 2, Battlefield Vietnam, and Battlefield 2142. Don't worry, not to be confused with 2042. If you talk with most of the fandom from back in those days, Battlefield was loved by many. And while everyone has their favorite game personally in the series, many will say Battlefield 2 for example, there was no denying how much passion and love DICE put into these games. The concept of large battles showing off impressive 64-player battles, the class system that until recently had been a staple of the franchise, vehicle versus infantry, and maps that flowed pretty well for the most part. Heck, some games even included single-player missions and stories. Not as cinematic as today's games, but still impressive for the time. One thing to keep in mind for those games up to this point was that they only released on the PC. Later on, they would eventually release on consoles, but again, in the moment, they only released on PC. This left some players wondering, would these giant battles ever grace the consoles? Back in 2006, a little-known company called Electronic Arts purchased DICE. Then, shortly after, players saw what looked like a spin-off game. Not a first time for DICE, but still a spin-off nonetheless, called Battlefield Bad Company that released on the PS3 and Xbox 360 back in 2008. It had a pretty decent focus on its single-player campaign, which is new for the franchise, but it still included its signature PvP, though at a lower player count due to the limitations of the consoles and a switch to the Frostbite engine back then. The game sold pretty well despite there being no PC port, which PC players didn't seem to mind too much since they were accustomed to something like the 64-player matches. This also included a new feature though that players to this day consider it to be a staple of the franchise: Destruction, technically known as Destruction 1.0. Want to take down the wall your opponent is hiding in? Go right ahead. Take out that rocket launcher and show that building you mean business. Seriously, Destruction was a game changer, and to this day, whenever a new game comes out, everyone's always asking, how is Destruction handled? Is it going to be as great as it was back during these days? Sometimes it sticks, sometimes it doesn't, but regardless, Destruction was a game changer for the series. Then, right after Bad Company, things started to change, kicking off what some would call the golden age of Battlefield with the game that started it all, Battlefield Bad Company 2. Released in 2010, Bad Company 2 was a continuation of the Bad Company campaign along with the staple multiplayer, and it was the first time to be released on PC. This game brought with it improved gunplay, burst fire was the name of the game for this particular one, a bigger focus on rush, a bigger story, the Carl Gustav, and Destruction 2.0. You could literally level half of the map. And while it did affect balance in some of those maps, not gonna lie there, it was fun. I guarantee it. You talk to anyone during that time when it came to Bad Company 2, unless they're some kind of purist, Bad Company 2 was loved by many. Doesn't matter how much of the map you destroyed, it doesn't matter how much balance sometimes just went out the window sometimes due to how vehicles and other things worked. It was fun. It was awesome to play. And with all of this, Bad Company 2 was a huge success. Players from all over loved it. While not perfect, like I've said before, like the lack of strafing and other modern concepts, there was a reason there's so much positivity around this game. Again, you can look at this and say, you know what, this definitely not balanced very well, this not the greatest, but it still succeeded. And to this day, many people put at the very minimum at a B tier when it comes to a tier listing of any Battlefield series. Heck, it can still be a blast to go back and play it even to this day, is what I would like to say, but unfortunately, EA being EA has shut down the servers as of this year in 2023, actually. However, if you are on PC, there are some ways to get around it to keep playing, but for consoles, unfortunately, it's the end of an era. Which makes it even stranger when you see headlines like this back in 2017 where DICE is saying lines like, "We are confused as to why players like Bad Company 2. Gee, DICE, I don't know. Maybe ask the players? Look at what they like and what they keep asking for in your games going forward? I don't know. I'm not a game dev, but just an idea." While only a year after Bad Company 2, it would be over 6 years for those looking for a proper sequel to the fan favorite Battlefield 2. It was time to introduce the big game itself, Battlefield 3. Battlefield 3 felt like the next big gen title of the time. Top of the line graphics, a return of jets to the battlefield, modern movement and gameplay, server browser changes, and even new features like suppression and more. And based on the sales numbers, the game sold pretty well, I guess. Ha! Sarcasm! While things like dedicated maps for modes like Rush took a backseat this time, unfortunately, Destruction had been toned down a bit, and suppression just killed your aim in the game's early life, no one could deny Battlefield 3 had succeeded. And while it did not do something like beat Call of Duty in sales or anything like that, it was still pulling some major numbers. Heck, I remember playing a ton back on the PS3 in my college days with my friends. I must have put in at least 700 hours into my junior year alone. And I was a tanker. Anyone else here a tanker? Raise your hands. Anybody in the back? No? Okay. Things like tanking, flying a heli, gunplay on maps like Seine Crossing and Demavan Peak, and a ton of the DLC maps were a lot of fun to jump in and just immerse yourself and lose yourself in this game. It was a great time to be a Battlefield fan. And again, if you wanted to, you could jump back into Bad Company 2 and play some of those modes and get some of that destruction you might have been missing from Bad Company 3. Might have been a little hard to find some matches, obviously. Like anything with old games, it gets harder and harder to find matches, especially for online stuff. but you could still do that back in the days, which was really fun. One of my favorite maps from Battlefield 3 was definitely Damavan Peak. Anyone remember your first peak jump? It was awesome. The only downside to this, however, though, was that whatever game came out after 3 would really have to impress players to get them to move away to this next game. One final thing when it came to Battlefield 3 was obviously the DLC and the map packs. I know I didn't touch on this particularly, but one thing that Battlefield also introduced was Battlefield Premium. As a paid service, it gave you priority in servers, early access to map packs, and more. It had a mixed reception from players, and by mixed, I mean quite a few did not like it. There were times where it was actually nice because, you know, you got the new fancy thing, but it definitely was not the greatest thing, I would say. It was also believed by many that at this particular moment right here in the franchise's history is where the first crack in DICE really started to form. Trying to ride the success while keep up with a certain FPS franchise, gee, I wonder which one it is, DICE soon released Battlefield 4 in late 2013 after the final DLC map pack released for Battlefield 3. Dubbed Battlefield 3.5 by many in the beginning, Battlefield 4 had a terrible launch. It was disastrous. Crazy bugs, minor graphical upgrades, broken systems, terrible servers, crashes, which even resulted in lawsuits against them. Battlefield 4 did not release in a great state, and that's putting it mildly. While the base game did have some nice updates like boat combat and more destruction on some maps, it was a far cry from a true sequel and even simply a complete game. If something wasn't done soon, this could really damage the Battlefield franchise. Well, thankfully, we got that. Enter DICE LA, who was brought in to right the ship that was Battlefield 4 and help the main DICE branch from Sweden. Aside from doing things like fixing servers and everything, they included things like the community test environment, which gave birth to BF4 CTE. After a long time of fixing bugs, crashes, bringing new map packs and everything, Battlefield 4 had finally reached its peak, and because of this, a lot of people consider it to be the best game in the franchise, or at least one of the top ones if you talk to anyone in the community. Heck, the CTE allowed for something that was really cool called the Community Map Project, where the community actually got to help DICE design a map that was then in turn released to everyone for free. And this was after all of the original DLC was already done. It was not required or anything, it was purely out of good faith. And you know what? This is why we say sometimes, back in my day, we had this. I know, kind of ironic seeing this, what happened with Battlefield 4 back in the day, but still, to see something like this back then, it was unheard of. And to this day, to my knowledge, I don't think another development team has done anything like this, where they have included us in the map building. And you know what? Funny enough, that map is considered one of the best maps in Battlefield 4. I don't know about the rest of the franchise, but in terms of Battlefield 4, that map is awesome. After all of this, it looked like DICE was finally starting to seal the cracks that we had mentioned earlier beforehand. Things were getting back to normal. They were in charge of their game, and not only were their promises being fulfilled, but the game itself was being supported, and it was just a great time to be a Battlefield fan. Another small part to it as well, which I won't discuss much, is actually the spin-off Cops and Robbers game made by Visceral Games called Battlefield Hardline. While considered a giant DLC by many, and let's be perfectly honest, the story was kind of miffed, to say the least, it did actually add some features in this Battlefield game to the franchise, like taking ammo off of teammates, which actually a lot of people liked, especially when you didn't have a teammate to actually drop an ammo box. So again, while not the greatest game or anything like that, it did bring a few features that would be nice to see going forward into the future, and a few of them have. Unfortunately, not a lot of them did though. Then came 2016, and this is where we saw more cracks start to form in the series with Battlefield 1. Now, don't get me wrong, Battlefield 1 not only sold amazing, but the graphics, atmosphere, and the feel of a World War I game was amazing. Many loved this game, including myself for a while. However, after a short while, the lack of weapons and other items in the games started to show the game's downsides. Now, you can still actually find people online to play this game to this day. But I do remember seeing back when this game was being developed, how a lot of articles came out saying that DICE really had to convince EA to even allow them to make this game. It started to become clear at that point, at least for me, that EA was really in charge. And I mean like they dictated everything for the most part. Now, I get it. It's EA's company. DICE works for them. But beforehand, DICE had a lot of sway. Wasn't starting to look that way, at least in my eyes. Then the big one happened. Battlefield 5. Oh boy, where to even start with this game? The debut trailer, the confusing messages from developers and top brass, and even remember, well, if you don't like it, don't buy it. The focus on battles that nobody knows about, the lack of maps. Yes, I said it twice. Features missing, and so many more. If you were gaming during that time, then you probably saw something about Battlefield 5, and it wasn't in a good light. Even with the closed alpha and open beta, the community was just not interested in this game. The lack of maps and modes soon after release also did not help. It took DICE months to get things fixed and into a decent state. But at the end, it was too little too late. You saw headlines everywhere about messages from the original release trailer where people were talking about arms and their prosthetics and everything, all the cosmetics that DICE was going to probably do with this stuff, samurai swords on European fighters and everything. It was a mess. And that initial trailer carried through with Battlefield 5 even to this day, and is why a lot of people don't play this game. Which is kind of sad, because the final DLC, at least taking place during the Pacific War, actually was a great DLC, and it was looking to finally get the game back on track until EA pulled the plug on that. And unfortunately, the game lost support after that. Oh, and don't even get me started on the little battle royale that they tried to add to it. But it had some interesting parts to it. It was behind a paywall, which killed it automatically. And the battle royale scene was dwindling if you weren't Fortnite or Call of Duty at that time. So it's kind of like, what was the point? Finally, we get to the latest game and present day, Battlefield 2042. Ooh, I still have bad memories with this game. Just like with Battlefield 5, where do I even start with this game? The terrible, misleading trailer and all the news coming out of EA, into this is why you don't trust EA and other big companies when they do their talking points. A lot of veteran developers starting to leave the company. Some of this happened during Battlefield 5 as well, but still, nonetheless. A lackluster closed alpha, which you can see right here that I was part of, and the beta where everyone pleaded with DICE to delay this game to polish it because it desperately needed it. And you know what? To their credit, they did. For 1 month. 1 month. Then the game released, and oh boy, what a shit show. I mean, come on, it was like Battlefield 4 all over again, but 10 times worse. Plus, there were a ton of missing features. I'm sure you've seen the list. That giant list of everything they left out of the game just blows my mind that that even happened. And before any defenders go into the comments, yes, these features do matter. Now, I know why a lot of those are left out, and we're going to get at that in just a second. But in the moment when the game released and everything, DICE lost like 90% of their players, and people will probably never trust them again. And you know what? I honestly can't blame them. You see, DICE has a terrible track record of making a brand new Battlefield game and leaving out a bunch of features from the previous game that many love and thought were amazing. Then, most likely due to working schedules and also working on the Frostbite engine, whether it's updating things, just unfortunately does not give them enough time, and they have to leave these features out. And again, I've said this before in many videos, and I hope it's been pretty apparent here in this video. I do not blame any floor developer when it comes to simply building these games. They have to do what they're told. It's their job. They have to make this game the way that their higher ups want them to. But still, a lot of trust has been lost. Heck, one of the biggest factors to 2042's downfall is that the original game, what it was originally supposed to be, was a battle royale. That's right. Battlefield wasn't even going to be Battlefield anymore. It was just going to be a battle royale. And you know what? If they took the Battlefield name out and actually just made the battle royale the way it was and just called it something else, even if they didn't use the Battlefield name to some extent and said it was some kind of spin-off in an alternate universe or something like that, it actually might have been okay. But they obviously didn't. The base maps in the game clearly show that this was meant to be a battle royale. Also, 128 players was kind of a dead giveaway later on, which was also a huge mistake for a normal Battlefield game. Old DICE tested this years ago. Look at this screenshot right here. They tested 128 players and even said, no, it does not work. They concluded that it was not fun, it can't be balanced with the game modes that they have, and it was not possible for what they want to do, and they stuck with 64 players, which is the way it should be. I've always been somebody who thought, you know what, if you can properly improve upon something, do it. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. There's a reason games like God of War and other games of that nature are the way that they are, and they have stayed the fundamentals the way they have. And they have sold millions of copies every single time. There is a reason for that, and unfortunately, DICE has not learned that. At least the higher ups haven't. I will leave a huge deep dive in the top right corner and in the pinned comment, leading to a video that I saw courteous of Tom Henderson. He goes into great detail about the people being hired, how things had to do a 180-degree turn halfway through development, where the biggest team and all this extra time terms came from when they were marketing to hype us up for this game. Spoilers, they lied, like straight up. And a lot of extra details that the average person is not going to know unless you watch that video. So after you're done listening to this video, if you want more of that, go check out his video. After the initial release, fans turned against DICE, like I stated before, demanding refunds, questioning why they made so many changes to the Battlefield formula, why all of the noted features were missing, and just what the F happened. Like, just what happened? It was after that point, DICE had to go into DEFCON 1 mode and spend the next 6+ months fixing basic things like servers, adding a lackluster scoreboard, and so many other things. One thing I learned about Tom's video that I mentioned earlier beforehand was the development time and updating the engine during 2020. So let's take a quick look at this. They said they had 3 years to make this game. Well, half of that was updating the engine while the other half of the development team was making whatever the game was going to be. And also halfway along that road, they stopped doing the battle royale that they were going to make and tried to make that into the new Battlefield game. Plus, not to mention with COVID and everything, that made it even harder to work on. So realistically, in terms of the time that they made 2042 that we currently have, it was pretty much only about a year, give or take, that they really were able to work on something. Another thing we mentioned beforehand was new developers. A ton of new developers who did not know how to work on the engine at all were thrown into the trenches and basically told to make it better, since so many veterans who had made the Frostbite engine had left, especially after Battlefield 5. Then, right as the seasons were supposed to be started, that's where even more trouble came into. They had to devote a bunch of resources to fixing the maps for balance, and due to those fixes in the beginning, meant that new content was delayed even more. Heck, there's a reason a lot of people look at the seasons for Battlefield 2042 and go like, one map and just some random battle pass stuff? That's it? That's not going to compete with the competition right now, and it sadly isn't, unfortunately. It's a big head scratcher when it comes to a bunch of this stuff. And like you can probably tell, there is a ton more of this stuff that we could go over and over, but I think you get the idea. 2042 was a major flop after the marketing that tugged at all players, thinking that this was finally going to be returned to form. And sadly, it was not. With everything we just went over, this brings us to today. While Battlefield 2042 is technically still alive, it's clear that DICE does not have full confidence in it, regardless of what they say. Season 5 was just announced right as it was being released, basically, and they refused to announce anything else going forward. Heck, the game is free to my knowledge on PlayStation Plus, or was for a while, and it's had a ton of free weekends to try and bring players back, with some success, but if you look at the Steam numbers right now, not many have stuck around for the long term. It's honestly really sad to see this great franchise reduced to what it currently is right now. And to any of the comments that are going to say something along the lines of, but the future looks bright because they brought on Vince Zampella and all these new Battlefield departments ready to focus on the franchise, it doesn't do anything for me. I've been burned one too many times, and I think I speak for a majority of the player base and old Battlefield fans that they feel the same way. Plus, with all the talent that has left DICE, which resulted in Battlefield 2042 being the way that it is, EA wanting some of that Battle Royale pie and making them chase trends and everything, And with the specialists and the map layouts and everything, it's clear that one guy, while as great as he can be, I don't think he can fix it as fast as everyone thinks that they possibly can. If you don't know what I'm talking about, after the release of 2042, a man by the name of Vince Zampella was brought on to be the head of Battlefield. Vince, for those who don't know, has worked on a ton of big FPS games in the past, from personal favorites like Respawn and Titanfall, and even some of the better Call of Duty games. Many are hoping that this man can be the savior to the Battlefield franchise. But like I stated before, it takes more than one guy to do that, and they've got a lot to prove. Now, to finish up this huge discussion video, which thank you, by the way, if you stuck it out this long, I want to give my own personal thoughts and opinions on this. Some of this might sound like a bit of a rant, but hopefully this whole video has shown that while it may sound like a rant, I love this franchise and I want nothing but the best for it. It's just, unfortunately, where we are right now has left me high and dry, unfortunately. I want to start off by asking this. This is to DICE. This isn't to the floor developers. This is to the people heading DICE right now. Where is the DICE that innovated and did not simply follow trends? Really? A battle royale? Taking classes away? Heck, you doubling down on those classes when you asked you to remove them, all to simply sell microtransactions is just eye-rolling. Yes, I know, business and yada yada. I have said that so many times when it comes to videos and companies doing certain things, but it cannot be the go-to excuse. I know it cannot be easy for developers to see us rip into their games online and not be able to change anything or talk about it with us due to contracts and everything. But this hurts so much. Heck, you know what? I'm even gonna say this right now. A very unpopular opinion, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I was actually okay with 2042 after the initial trailer released about saying no to the single player. I was actually okay with that. The only good single player for a Battlefield game was Bad Company 2. Don't try to fool yourselves. Bad Company 2 was the only good single player game. Technically Bad Company if you want to, but regardless. I also know some people will say, no, we need it, or what about those with no internet, or to introduce you to how to shoot and all that kind of stuff. If given time, sure, let's have a single player mode to help teach those about the modes of the game. But unless it's Bad Company 3, don't even bother. It's wasted resources at this point. But that means, and listen carefully here, this means that the PvP really has to deliver. I'm talking 15 to 20 maps at minimum. Get back to the focus of modes per map and good balance. Not every mode has to fit on every map. If later on down the road you find out that a smaller mode, like say Team Deathmatch for example, can work on a particular map, great. But don't try to do one map to however many game modes you're trying to make. Along with the maps, you need to have the customization that everyone loves from Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, but not the terrible layout that 2042 has with all its customization. Bring back some of those really cool graphics from 3 and 1. I mean, 2042 looks okay, I guess. It is what it is. And like I said at the beginning of the video, innovate, try new things, improve upon things that work within the franchise. When I say new things, I don't mean kill something that we all like and throw in this thing just because you can monetize it. Again, I know the business side of things. I know you have to, at some level, do that. But there are ways around it. If you had kept the normal squad look of everything that we had known from the Battlefield franchise for so long in 2042, and you still wanted to sell skins, we would have bought them actually. As someone who hates buying skins in these games, I probably would have bought something if you had a really cool skin for all 4 classes of the Chinese army or the Russian army or the US army or whatever armies you have in your game. I probably would have bought them if they look cool. Don't do what Bungie does with their crappy free-to-play armor sets and everything like that. No, make them good. We will buy them. But at the same time, maybe allow us to earn them down the line. You know, the first season or two, they can only be bought. And then later on, we're able to earn them in some way or fashion. Because I guarantee you, there will be some people who still buy them. And that's going to make you money, which makes your higher-ups happy. Everyone wins at that point. Again, not a perfect roadmap or anything, but it's a starting point. And until things like that change, Majority of your player base is not going to return. We want to play Battlefield because we like the things like squads and the military look of the characters. We don't want hero characters with abilities. Look at all the past Battlefield games. Majority of people revive when they need to, repair your vehicle, true teamwork, give ammo and health. While yes, it's a flawed system, I actually loved the upgrade system that we had in Battlefield 4, where you got the extra perks. Started off with a small sprint buff, started to get more ammo, and heck, even got things like rockets and everything, but it was unique to each class. Still need some fine tuning and everything. I get that, no problem. But it was a cool fundamental system that if you had improved upon it from 1 to 5 and eventually into the current day, it could have been a really cool system. Also, bring back destruction. I know we bring this up every single new Battlefield game, and like we said, DICE has a terrible track record of leaving features out. And maybe in some way and fashion, that is a way to market your game. But when a majority of players want you to have certain things in the games, maybe you should include them. Just saying. I mean, look at 2042. People just run around shooting, and that's it. Sure, some people in 2042 know how to cap a point, and some people might revive you if you just happen to be there and nothing else is happening on screen. But squad play, teams, all that stuff, that's gone. That's out the window. And again, I've stated before, and I probably sound like a broken record, don't even get me started on the 128 players. Just don't do it anymore. It's not fun. Custom game mode on a custom server? Sure, by all means, go ahead. But for a normal mode, no. Also, server browser, bring it back. Reel it in. I know EA likes to be cheap, but you gotta bring it back. Do it. Bring server browsers back. It's way better. It seriously is. At this point, I could keep going on and on, but I'm getting tired at this point. So I'm gonna leave it here for my rant / personal opinions. Oh, and regarding the season 6 for Battlefield 2042, that's just, I don't even know what they're trying to do with this game at this point. It feels like they're tiptoeing to see if more seasons can work, but every opinion that I have stated in this entire video still stands. I don't think season 6 is really going to make a difference. Yes, the free weekends that they have can push numbers, but that's for almost any game. And I'm assuming people probably looked at it after 2 years and be like, all right, let's see what it looks like. We'd have to see what the numbers are going to look like afterwards, but regardless, I still stand by everything I have said in this video. And until things change, I don't see things improving. As of September 2023, DICE says that the next Battlefield game will be a reimagine of the series. Yeah, that's not good. With the opening of the new branches working on things like single player and this supposed connected ecosystem, it's hard to say where things are going to go in the near future, especially with something like the new seasons of 2042, since we don't know anything after the current season 5. Plus, if I hear the word reimagine, I just roll my eyes harder than 2 football players hitting each other out on the field. I have no problem when things are improved upon and changed, but 2042 was not it. I really hope Vince has a real high enough power to do what is right for the franchise and to push past the BS of the EA higher-ups. I really do. But also that he has a vision going forward, because that is what can kill a game sometimes, is by having a leader without a vision. If you have that, usually things can work out pretty well. Time, I guess, is going to tell, but I can say this with 100% confidence right here. The name Battlefield is at its lowest point, and nothing short of a return to true form of the Battlefield series with all the bells, whistles, and innovation will bring the players back. You can do that, DICE. People will come back and play your game again. If you don't, you're going to keep dwindling and eventually just become making some random game for EA like half of Activision's developers do for Call of Duty. I know it's a hard truth, but that's basically what's going to happen. Today, we talked a ton about the history of the Battlefield franchise, where it is currently, where I think it personally needs to go, and what could happen in the near future. So now, I want to ask you, what do you think of the Battlefield franchise? What is your favorite game in the series, if you've played any of them? And what do you want to see in the future from the next game and games going forward for the franchise? Leave all your comments down below. I want to reply to as many as I possibly can. Thank you so much for everyone that watched today's video, especially if you stuck around to the very end. It helps the channel out a lot and allows us to make more of these videos going forward because it's free when you do things like watch the video, leave a like, and leave a comment. I've been Tallen with Direct Gaming here, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Again, thank you so much. See you next time. Johnny.